Don't go home.
What just happened?
You're going to die.
What? What's you doing?
Don't go home.
Stay back!
Please listen to me.
Stay away from me!
If you go home, you will die. I saw it.
Stay the fuck away from me!
Listen, please. Please, I'm a Camille.
Tix a Camijo Whisperer. This is Lovecraft Country Spoilers.
This is spoiler.
It wasn't great. It was we had nothing to go on there. We're covering a lot of ground, but this is the familiar voice of one of your hosts tonight, Pappy, recording from Louisville, Colorado. We skipped a week of Lovecraft Country Spoilers because Spoilers host Jordan got married, and that's Josh's brother, so he was kind of busy with that. So congrats to Jordan. But we're back better than ever with a 3-episode slate for you tonight, doing 5, 6, and 7 of Lovecraft Country.
Pappy, are we going to bring it home with 8, 9, and 10 then? Is that the end of the end of the season?
We could do that. I kind of wanted to do 8, 9, and maybe 10 on its own. I think that could be kind of cool, like just as a big sum up, because I'm hoping we get Cthulhu by then. But the voice you just heard was Josh. Why don't we let our host introduce ourselves, starting with Josh, who you are, where you're recording from, and I haven't thought of a spoiler yet. Have you read anything recently or any podcast you've been listening to recently? Josh?
Hello, this is Josh from Goshen. We never tell each other these questions beforehand, and
I'm sorry.
Just like I got to try to sound cool or something. I actually just re-binged The Adventure Zone, which is like one of the nerdiest things I've ever done. I listened to that twice now.
You love that pod.
It's a McElroy Brothers podcast. They're the guys from My Brother, and Me. But I'll just leave it there. We got a lot of stuff to cover tonight.
I like it. Then the familiar host, Stevie. I think you've been on all of these Lovecraft Country episodes so far, but what have you been listening to or reading? Any H.P. Lovecraft?
Not any H.P. Lovecraft. This is about as Lovecraft as it gets for me. Let's see here. I love the podcast Script Notes, hosted by John August, who wrote Big Fish, and Craig Mazin, who wrote Chernobyl.
Hello and welcome. My name is John August.
My name is Craig Mazin.
And this is Script Notes, a podcast about screenwriting and things that are interesting.
And he's also writing The Last of Us HBO series. And their episode on screenwriting is really informative and really cool. So I love that pod.
Script Notes is the name of the pod? Yeah.
Yep.
Check that out. And last but not least, we have a special returning guest, 2-time member of the podcast, Dave. Dave, which last name should we call you? Because you go by 2 last names online, and there was a discussion in the thread on if you 2 were the same person, and those kind of came together. But Dave, who are you? Where are you recording from? And what media have you been into lately?
I'm Dave Mello. Dave Wheelroute is the author persona I use so I can publish books without getting in trouble when I try to apply for teaching jobs.
Smart.
Shout out to Jordan. Congrats on the marriage. So I'm recording from Massachusetts, Worcester, Massachusetts, to be specific. And I have been digging on the Are You Talking Heads to My Talking Head podcast, I believe it's called. The name seems to change weekly, but it's the Adam Scott Aukerman Talking Heads podcast, and they just had a special guest on to talk about an album in the form of David Wayne from Wet Hot American Summer, and I feel like I am now the David Wayne of this Lovecraft endeavor.
That's very we did a top 5 episodes or favorite shows on TV, which is going to be a super episode of the Goodbye Mellow Brick Road podcast, which you host, which is one of my favorite podcasts. But let's get into the episode tonight. Like I said, I'm doing 5. Stevie's going to do 6. Josh is going to do 7. Dave, I'm going to start with you. The way I look at 5 is there was 2 major kind of plot points. There was Ruby drinking the polyjuice potion and turning white, and there was Montrose exploring his sexuality and the audience kind of learning about his sexuality. Which one do you want to kick us off with?
I would say let's do Ruby. That seemed to be the main focus. It seemed like a big Ruby episode to me, I think. I remember I was watching it with my dad, and he was like, I feel like these two are going to end up being the same person. And I was like, no, surely I've seen a scene with them together. But then I started looking at them, and I was like, wow, these two Aryans really look identical. And I mean, I've long established I'm not a fan of gore, so there was a lot of body morphing and blood and vessels that was hard to get through. But I mean, for a character study, it's, we got to Trojan horse it through some horror.
Well, something Dave just mentioned that I wondered, do they ever appear earlier together, or did he die like since an earlier episode, or do you guys know exactly the timeline there?
I don't think they actually did appear. I think he did die before, unless anyone else has something different. Dude, this show is very confusing to me. There's a lot of information because not only like there's multiple people like switching into multiple bodies, which what are their names? One's I don't even have it. Christina, and one's Michael.
William.
Christina and William.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they were twins when the show started. I had no idea they were even.
I thought they were brother sister.
Yeah, like a Lannister type situation. Stevie, what's actually happening there? Like from a mechanics of the show, how are people switching bodies?
We find out in a later episode that William, or later in this episode or another episode, that William was on the brink of creating this potion. Christina ended up like finishing it. It's really strange, but it's a blood spell. So we find out that the person that Ruby, the white woman that Ruby turns into, is dead, and Christina's drawing blood on that, and William is already dead, and she's drawing blood from that. But I'm not gonna lie, I don't love episode 5 at all.
Oh.
I just don't. But I love the scenes where like the body starts cracking and the skin starts falling off. Like, I think that is so cool from a makeup and special effects standpoint. I think that is awesome.
There's a lot of locust themes like in this. Like there's like one scene like, when she's first metamorphosizing, there's that TV announcer and he's like talking about the 10 billion locusts that are headed straight for London or something. Like, first of all, I want to know what happened with that. Like, did they make it? Like, where did they end up going? But I think even the dance that like Sammy does later, he says it's called like the locust or something. Like, and so it keeps coming back to this theme of like, there's kind of like this like wanting to be someone you're not, or wanting to like transcend what society is, I guess, the box that has put you in, right? And like what Ruby's able to do is transcend like her, what she's been typecast as society, as a black lady, and when she becomes this white lady, Josh, what happens to her? Because this is, I think, I really did like this part of it when she's in Carson's and everything that happens with her boss. I thought this is really well done.
Yeah, so maybe this isn't the most entertaining episode, Stevie, but I think this has a lot of really memorable moments, for better or for worse. One, already mentioned by Dave, the skin sloughing off. Great. Never going to forget that, really. And then the second one is this woman who's been oppressed her entire life, suddenly in a white person's body, and to see that, I guess in William's words, that she gets treated like a human being and how that kind of changes her. I thought that was pretty compelling stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of like, and like the way she treats Tamra too, right? It's like she's, and again, I think we talked about this on the last episode. If it was something that like Tamra had lighter skin color, but I kind of think potentially that the whole reason that the boss picked her is like he thought that was someone that he could bully. You know what I mean? Because he's a terrible person, the boss.
I agree with that, and I think that a lesser show would make that relationship very one-sided. Like, she would go out of her way to mentor her, or she would be her motivation would be like to get her fired so she could take that token black spot at Marshall Fields. But instead, it's like really complex, and you're always kind of left wondering what she's going to do next, and I really like that about the show.
Mm-hmm. And it uses the word currency a lot. I think Ruby mentions that like her currency was just being a white lady for an afternoon, and then they're talking about like how magic is the currency of like power, and it's kind of like that this is how they're able to transact in a society that kind of like rejects them. But like speaking of being rejected, there's, I mean, it's intersectionality. Dave, Montrose is a very complex character. How are you feeling about him at this point in the show? Because he's done some bad things, but we've seen many sides of him.
I don't fully understand him. Like when they killed that like Yahima, or the like, was that it? Yahima, the one they killed in the Indiana Jones kind of episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then he just like, but then like he like got like Tick beat him up and he was upset. But then like, I don't know, it's very odd. Like I feel like all the Montrose threads just keep ending up like hitting walls, but for no reason. Like I was very confused about his role in this like larger narrative. Like I really like the interior character stuff, and there's more of that even in episode 7 when they have breakfast together. But in this one, I just was baffled. I don't really know. I was definitely like just checked out of the Montrose stuff. I was more into, I got like some Joan from Mad Men vibes from the Ruby storyline, and that was what was drawing me in more. I can't make heads or tails of the character arc of Montrose because I especially since I thought he was not going to be a big part of the show, and then he turns up and basically replaces Courtney B. Vance.
And that's funny that you mentioned Joan from Mad Men, because that was the initial thing with Ruby, where it's like, okay, she's a white lady now, and all of her problems are like solved. I kind of felt like bad from like a feminist perspective. It's like, well, it wasn't that it's great like to be a woman back then. She didn't have like all of these opportunities. And then like I think it's like when you see Christina is transforming into William, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, they're still trying to get more power. But like, I don't know, Stevie, like the character inconsistency as we wrap up this episode, like Tick is like out of control violent in this episode. You know what I mean? Like did that track for you? That was really confusing.
Did not track at all. A lot of things with Tick from this episode on really don't track. That's one part of this episode I didn't love, but one thing I really loved in this episode was its use of color.
Yeah.
So, Pappy and I have talked about this, how important the color red is throughout this show.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when Ruby first transforms into, what's the white woman's name? Would she go by Tamara?
I don't know. It's Ruby White.
Yeah, Ruby White. Yeah, to say Ruby White. When she first goes to apply, or like when she's kind of first getting used to herself, she is wearing like this black dress, but they make it a real focal point of her wearing these red gloves. And then when she's like fully confident and ready to go apply for that job, she's wearing a full red dress. And with Montrose, in this episode, he starts off wearing these really bland, earthy tones. And then when he goes over to Sammy's, Sammy has like a really gray and soft red shirt that kind of spiral around. And then when we get to the club near the end of the episode, there's this scene where the lighting is so cool, where half of Montrose's body is red and half of it is still those earthy tones. And then like he walks into the full red of the light to almost like embrace himself. It was really cool what they did with the color.
That whole like party dance scene that has like the modern music playing over it, that is so cinematic. It reminds me a lot of the Phantom Thread party a little bit, like where it's just kind of like chaotic and like, I don't know, just fantastic in a lot of ways. But yeah, a lot of sex scenes in this episode, potentially leading to some pregnancies down the line, but it ends, I didn't get this, Stevie, this is kind of the bridge between our two episodes. It ends with the initials being carved into the ring. Do you know what that meant? And then he's
not
falling.
A clue.
Okay. Does anybody know
else?
meant?
I don't have a clue.
Yeah, it's just helping him decode that language.
That's like the Rosetta Stone ring.
Basically, I gotta put a stop to the pod though, guys. I mean, speaking of red, that's the color of the handkerchief she stuffs in his mouth when Ruby
I almost forgot about
sticks
this.
her naughty stiletto.
How has this not been mentioned by now?
Right.
Dude, that is one of the most graphic scene. Oh.
I'm going to go back and re-record the spoiler and be like, Ruby shoves a stiletto up her racist boss ass. This is spoilers. That would have been a million times better than whenever I said.
They show it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know why, but it was bloodier than I expected.
Agreed. And less poopy than I would expect.
But like, I also don't know like what I was expecting.
It's I mean, it's a cathartic moment, right? And like you don't even, he's a terrible person. She just basically, I don't know if she murdered him. Probably not. He's probably gonna live or whatever. Like when she says like, I want you to
He'll
know.
probably kill himself after that.
I want you to know who did this to you, and she uses like the same like racial slur that he used earlier. Like it's like she's not just like stabbing that stiletto up his ass for what he did to Tamara. She's stabbing that stiletto up his ass for like every time she's been interrupted in her life, and that's what she keeps going back to. Is like things are going pretty good for her, and then she just gets interrupted. But not to interrupt episode 6, Stevie. We're off on the other side of the world for meet me in Daegu. Is that how you say it?
Daegu?
I've never been to South Korea.
Neither have I. I've always wanted to go though. Always wanted to go, but this is what I thought we initially were gonna get with Lovecraft Country, and I absolutely love this episode because we start off with a character that we do not know at all. 1949, South Korea. I think her name was it Gia?
Gia?
Yes.
Sounds right.
I don't know, but it's really cool because she lives with her mom. She's like planning on becoming a nurse, and there's like these things of like family and honor and bringing back like honor to the family. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like Josh, did you like how this started off? I mean, kind of like as its own separate story with nothing to do with anything else.
I did, but it took me about halfway through the episode to realize this was going to be the whole episode, if you know what I mean. I kind of thought they'd go back to the main storyline for a while, so it's kind of distracting, but not to take away from this episode as a whole, but that was just like my initial reaction when I like flipped this episode on, you know.
Bold choice to go like subtitles for basically 90% of the episode too, right? Like this is a reading one.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, subtitles don't bother me. I think it bothers Josh quite a bit.
Nah.
Did it bother you, Josh?
It does.
Are we going to go deep into this again?
Well,
No, it didn't.
let's pull in Dave. Dave, we go deep on this pod. Subs or dubs? Which one do you prefer?
Oh, I'm a
in
subs
foreign
guy. Call me Jared Fogle. I love those subs.
That's terrifying.
I'm subs over dubs guy too, but we're talking about subs over versus just having like the regular volume on is what the actual argument is, right?
Yeah, I mean,
typically,
in addition to the volume, because I can't hear anything. That's my problem. I can barely hear this podcast. I don't know, but I mean, like, I was into the whole Korea setting. I thought it was great to like depart from what we've been doing. I thought it was like a brave choice, Stevie.
So did I. And like the thing was too, I mean, you start off kind of like this girl, like especially if she goes to like her speed dating and no one's getting along with her, or like not one guy is like, hey, I'll check this box. I mean, even her nursing friend has to invite her out.
What are
Dave,
the like? What is it like the sexual market like in South Korea where the men can just like pick from the women? Are there like way more women than men or something? Like it's like the opposite here.
I think there are more women than men.
Or is it just like a power?
No, I think
thing?
that's an actual statistic, Pat.
This is the whole like Mulan thing, really.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to ask Dave. So, Dave, you don't like gore, right?
Absolutely not.
What did you think of kind of like the first reversal in this episode when a dude gets shredded in half after he goes home with this girl?
Well, at first I was watching the tentacles enter him from her, and I was like, this is pretty rough, but it's like tentacles, I can handle it. And then he just like exploded into nothing and blood, and I couldn't. I mean, that's gonna stick with me for the rest of my life.
Kind of like the memories of that man stick with her the rest of her life.
What an amazing segue.
This first guy that she has sex with, they clown him so much. There's all these close-ups of his goofy ass face when he's like getting off. It's really funny.
Oh, that poor bastard. But Pap, what's the big twist in this? I mean, first off, we think like, oh, she needs to bring a guy home for honor. Then it's like, oh, she's a monster. Then there's so many layers to this. Like, what's the big twist?
So I think what it boils down to is her real mom, or okay, there was a woman who remarried a man, and the man intentionally targeted her because he was a pedophile and he knew that he could take advantage of her. He ends up raping her daughter, and then does the daughter die from this, right? Or
no,
so the daughter gets her mind erased, and then she needs to, or something.
The
what
spirit
happens?
inhabits her. It's basically like a King Payment sort of situation, right, Stevie?
So
And she needs to like fuck 100 dudes and eat their souls is the end game. But I don't know why.
And then she'll get her daughter back, who will be unscathed. Is that what it is?
Who won't remember any of
Who won't
this?
remember it?
But she took revenge on the dad, and so the dad who had raped her has his memory implanted in her, and that's like a whole big plot point of like the beginning when you're trying to figure out what's going on, and like the mom's explaining that that's like not appropriate human love. Like it's the information is doled out very sparingly. It's not like, there's no big exposition dump per se, right?
Yeah, and that was one thing. I mean, there was a great moment. It's dark, but it's a great moment where the mom is screaming at this, spirit Kumiho, and she's like, I know my daughter's in there. I know my daughter's deep in there. And that's when the Kumiho starts singing that lullaby she would sing when her stepfather would rape her.
노란 나비 흰 나비 춤을 추며 오너라 봄바람에 금잎도 방긋방긋 웃으며.
And it's like a really dark moment, but it also says a lot kind of about the family and also the rest of the episode. But there's also a whole Tick subplot. Pappy, did this do anything for you, or would you kind of just like to kept with just this Kumiho?
The show is ambitious in the social justice themes that it's trying to tackle, and it's trying to tackle basically every social justice theme that I can think of, from like American colonialism to trans rights to, African American rights. Like if we're going to set it in Korea, I'm totally fine with that. And I'm totally fine making Tick a complex character. Like I think if you're asking me in general, what would I prefer? I wish this was just like an anthology. You know what I mean? I wish this was just like standalone. If we're gonna do the Lovecraft
Pappy
stories,
wants to see every 99th guy that she screws.
No. I'm saying
An anthology.
I'm saying like, this could be like a 1 hour thing. I think that the next episode 7, I think Hippolyta could have just been a standalone story. I think like 5 could have been a standalone story with Ruby. Like I could have seen a whole hour of that story unfolding. So I guess if you're saying like, was I pumped that Tick showed up? Not really at all. But I do like that they're, I guess, making Tick a challenging character, right? From like using a homophobic slur in the next episode to like literally murdering a Korean woman, even though he is following orders. Like Tick is not just a good guy, which I find compelling.
Dave, what do you think about like Tick through this episode? Because he seems like a pretty stone cold dude at this point. I mean, whether he's shooting an innocent woman in the head or pulling out, a woman's tooth when she's being interrogated, like his personality seems really all over the place.
Well, my conception of the Korean War is limited mostly to MASH, and Tick in this episode. I personally I never saw BJ or Hawkeye do any of the things that Tick does, so it was a bit of a departure. I liked how it kind of, because a part of it, the show in the first episode, I from the Jackie Robinson moment, I was hooked. I was in. I was like, this is incredible. Jackie Robinson just beat up a Lovecraft monster with a baseball bat. I'm all in. And then steadily that's been like eroded, and I haven't felt that same like creative high until Gia is like in the movie theater all alone singing along to Judy Garland, and I'm like, oh, I'm getting that feeling again.
Clang, clang, clang went the trolley. Ding, ding, ding went the bell. Sing, sing, sing went my heartstrings as we started for Huntington Dell. Chug, chug, chug went the...
And then when Tick came into the mix, I actually felt the opposite. I felt like he was enhancing her episode by connecting it to this like larger narrative, and not so much like the story plot-based narrative, but more like this emotional narrative of his character's journey and how there's so many moving parts of that. And the war is obviously something that's very big for him. So I appreciated how brought it all in for this larger arc of the show.
And let's just thank goodness that this isn't a story where, like, one of them saves the other in the throes of battle or some crap like that. I really enjoyed that it went away from those kind of cliches, too.
I'm happy, Dave, that you bring up the Judy Garland moment, because I actually got really excited when she started, like, singing and dancing, because I thought we were going to get a whole musical episode.
Oh.
And I was so pumped for that. And it went away real quick.
That would have been awesome.
But, yeah, that would have been great. Episode 6 ends pretty much how you think it's going to end, which is Tik and Jiha falling in love, and Jiha eventually revealing herself as a Kumiho, and Tik is freaked the fuck out. Even though this person who's a monster is telling him, hey, you're going to die like really quickly, he wants no part of it. And Pap, we end the episode when they go to see this. Josh, I think you called it a moondog.
It's a shaman, and I believe they call it a mudong.
Mudong.
And
okay.
Stevie keeps purposely mispronouncing that as moondog, which is a classic episode of spoilers.
Super classic, but I mean, Pap, where do you think this like leads to? Are they like eventually going to come back to this? Like, what did it mean to you by the end?
So like she foresees him, what was it, being tortured, right?
Yeah.
And like potentially dying. So like, I don't know, from the beginning I always thought that this may be my unconscious bias, I thought that the Korean thing was like ominous and like scary, that she was like a bad guy, you know, but it turns out she's been trying to warn him this whole time. And I don't know, I mean, you brought up Watchmen earlier when you and I were talking, that you were like rewatching a couple of those. It's like, it's kind of like the same thing now, like where is his fate inevitable? Like probably, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is she going to show up? Like, is there going to be a conflict, like a love triangle between her and Leti, especially if Letty's now like pregnant with his baby? Like,
right.
I see that like upcoming. Like I'm excited for it though. Like 6 is like my favorite episode of the series so far.
Mine as well.
I want more of her lore. I want more of that. Like I'm all in for where it's going.
People that listen to this podcast know that I love cryptozoology. And Stevie, can I use my Stevie question to ask you about this 8-tailed tiger spirit?
Oh, please. 9 tails?
Yeah, just tell me. Oh, 9 tails. Yeah, tell me everything you know about it, because I'm pretty lost on it.
Okay. So the only experience I've ever had with Kumihos in pop culture is, I believe it's Love, Death, and Robots, which is an amazing animated anthology on Netflix. And there's one episode where a father and son are like hunting Kumihos at night, and they typically come in the form of call girls and like comfort girls, and that's typically when like the Kumihos typically murder really bad men. So that's and I know they're foxes. This looks more kind of like wormy and octopus like. The tails are typically more like furry and nicer looking than what we got.
We need like a bumper for the Stevie question segment. Like when someone like uses the Stevie question, like just plays this little like jam for a second. But it's not Lovecraftian at all, right? Like this is just some South Korean lore that they're pulling in.
This is South Korean lore, yes.
Yeah.
But doesn't that fit right in with Lovecraft stuff?
No, I'm not. I just don't. I'm so unfamiliar with Lovecraft because I feel like sometimes I feel like it's like in the next one I feel like it's like an explicit Lovecraft reference that I'm not getting because I don't read him.
One thing that kind of stood out to me was I wonder whoever wrote this if they'd ever been to South Korea or just like researched South Korea online, because one of the first things they mention is kimchi. South Koreans, I mean, as far as I know in South Korean culture, like love kimchi, so that kind of made me smile a little bit.
Kimchi and soju. That's all I know about South Korea.
That's all I know. But yeah, that was episode 6 and Meet Me in Daegu.
I'm going to pick us up into chapter or episode 7. I don't know if they call them chapters, but this one just immediately, right off the bat, had some cool payoffs on some props that we've been talking about. Dave, are you as big of a fan of the comic book that the daughter's writing and the solar system, like panorama, like sort of alarm clock thing, as we are.
I think they're pretty interesting objects. I still have, like, I'm very lost in what any of this has to do with any sort of narrative, but I mean, they're interesting.
Yes.
I think they're awesome, and I'd been hearing a lot of hype about episode 6, and I love episode 6, but episode 7 kind of blasted me into outer space, literally. I loved it so much. Dave, since I'm talking to you right now, why don't you take us along, like, instead of just being a background prop, it kind of becomes like a focal point. Where does this cool solar system prop lead Hippolyta?
So I'm not going to be great with any sort of common nouns, I mean proper nouns in this, and like locations and such, because there's a lot of travel. I mean, these people they can get from point A to point B, and that can be like across the globe, and they can get there in like an hour. Incredible driving skills from everyone.
It's the Woody. That car got like 1,000 miles to the gallon, and its tank is 10,000 gallons big.
And Atticus like has no car to speak of, and is just as quick. But I think so. So the first half of the episode is sort of like it seems like a very moving the plot forward kind of thing. You know, Montrose is hanging out, and Atticus is not happy about with whom he is hanging out. But then Hippolyta, this is, finally she is taking center stage in the episode here, as she is.
Well, we can breeze by that, but one question I do have that I want to pause on, and I'll open this up for everyone and then toss it back to you, Dave. But they use like the F word, like the 2020 F word.
Hard F.
Thoughts, comments, suggestions?
Suggestions.
Was it needed, I guess?
Yes, absolutely needed. And if he as a man, particularly a black man in the 50s, would have accepted his father figure as a homosexual carte blanche with open arms, it would have been like the most unrealistic thing in the show. Is seen that as a show with vampires and Jackie Robinson like attacking things with bats, like Cthulhu's like that. I'm frankly disappointed. Like, I think it's totally unrealistic that Tick would experience no racism in South Korea. Like, that was really surprising to me and, like, frankly, unrealistic. But to me, Josh, I think that, like, anything, the word is the word, but anything short of him, like, rejecting that or, like, he's having a moment would have been completely unrealistic.
Do you think he needed to say it, though? And he could have, like, shown it?
What would he have said? I don't know. Like,
well, because I mean, like, I think him just saying that makes him like really surface level, and like he was abused growing up a lot, and I think they could have incorporated some sort of tick or mannerism in the very beginning, and him resorting to that and almost like sulking or doing a flashback, I think would have been more effective than just dropping the hard F word.
Is the F word like kind of the word fuck is for PG-13 movies, but for like rated R stuff, you just get one F word?
You only get one. You got to go hard. You only get one.
But like I've talked about this like a million times, like, and every time that word comes up on this podcast, I usually default to, okay, how is it being framed? And I use the example, it's not problematic that Paul Dano uses the N word in 12 Years a Slave because it's realistic. If a bully is using an F word in the 80s movie, I can, if there's like, retribution, or if we're meant to know that that's a mistake, or that's a bad guy, like I can accept that. Like that's why I'm not a big fan of like Bender using it in The Breakfast Club. He seems like a good guy. Like, but this is like one of the only examples I can think of where a show is willing, like they're being so challenging with Tick, in my opinion, Josh. Like I like between him like murdering Korean civilians and using that word, like short of like a white person using the N word, that's like the most extreme word of hate they could probably use on the show, right? I think it's like challenging and interesting and right up HBO's alley.
They also like they show that it's less rooted in like a sense of homophobia than it is in like like Atticus feels almost betrayed by his father in that moment where he almost like he's acting like a hypocrite. It's not, I mean, it's still not a great word choice, but it's I think it's coming from a different place than it might be than it might seem at first.
Was he saying that he was beating him as a child because he didn't want him to be gay as well, or because he was just like taking out his frustrations about being a gay man as a black man in the 50s?
I think he was projecting.
Yeah, projecting.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me too. Anyway, Dave. I mean, I'm glad we touched on that, but we can move on to what turns into some really just high fantasy sci-fi stuff here with Hippolyta. I'll toss it back to you, Dave, because a key pops out of that solar system prop. I don't know what else to call it. I just keep calling it a prop. I don't know. I'm an idiot. But a key pops out. She follows these coordinates, and there's like a lighthouse. Well, actually, the moon is like a lighthouse, just this huge spotlight of a moon shining on her. But she gets to this building, and what happens as she enters?
The cops are back. Some cops are back, not the same cops. They were destroyed by forest beasts last time, and finally we get to see like one of them actually like shoot them, and that was kind of it was nice to see them die by the hands of, or at least get shot by the hands of the characters instead of just like monsters and portals taking them away. Before we get into the Hippolyta, though, I think we should mention Letitia Lewis. When she was she felt sensitive in her reaction to garlic, and I thought she was going to end up being a vampire, but it seems like they're implying she's pregnant.
That's exactly what I said. Since when does like pregnancy turn you into a vampire? Like, you start
maybe that's where that old myth comes from. Like women like pregnant. Like, I don't know. Stevie probably knows. They'll get you in the night. They'll get you.
Like Stevie, when Lauren started showing, did she like start to disappear in like mirrors and stuff and like stay up all
night? Did you load your revolver with a silver bullet after that happened?
Nothing like that. Occasionally, she would be kind of like sprawled out in like the top corner of a ceiling, just staring at me.
Oh, normal stuff.
Just normal stuff like that. But I mean, it wasn't too bad. I got over it.
That's very progressive of you.
Okay, so let's dive in, because Hippolyta, so she's like a genius, right, Pappy? She starts typing in all these calculations, and
she's Goodwill Hunting.
She is, and I think that's kind of cool, because I don't know, for me, seeing an African American woman go through this journey that we're about to talk about and just be like super smart mathematically and scientifically, I think is really cool. I don't think that's shown very often in TV and stuff that just maybe I personally watch. But Pappy, pick us up here as she's just like frantically pressing buttons on this machine, and the cops are showing up and things are happening, right?
Right. So what in the background, Leti and Tick is like finding out what's happening. So he's on his way quickly to the scene. That's happening in the background. But she has, I guess, like an arc. I don't even know what it is. Is it an arc? Are we supposed to know what this thing is at this point? At this arcade machine that she is like punching these like cheat codes into to turn it on.
Portal. It's a portal machine.
It was the Last Starfighter.
It's the Last Starfighter machine. It is a portal. Okay, but there's like a machine. We don't exactly know what it does. She is able to figure it out. But like when it kicks on, that's when the cops come down. That's when Tick shows up. A fight ensues. In the chaos, a rift, I guess, in the space-time continuum shows up. It looks like literally like a tear in the atmosphere. But like in this tear, it's like changing channels of dimensions, like very Rick and Morty-esque, right? Like there's all these different like one, it'll be space and like a coastal planet, then like Hoth, then like a comet, then like all this crazy stuff, but like flying by like 10 of these like in like 5 seconds or something, like going crazy. One of the cops gets tossed in there, and you think it's just going to be like this kind of like, fate worse than death. And like when a cop gets tossed in there, it kind of begs the question, like, oh, what's going to happen if like to that cop? It must be like terrible. Then fucking both Tick and, sorry, what's her name? Hippolyta? I can't believe I forgot her name.
Hippolyta.
Yeah, she
Tick,
says.
Wait, Tick does not go in.
I thought he does go in.
Yeah, he does.
Tick and Hippolyta go in. We don't
they both
see
go in.
what happens to Tick, but like from that point on, like the last.
I think he dodged it.
No, he definitely goes in.
We'll find out later in the season, but that's what I personally think.
Okay, but either way, she is definitely in. And like the last, I don't know, what is it, like 30 minutes of this episode, Josh, is like her in these, well, I guess it starts off like she's in like a Slaughterhouse 5-esque like display zoo thing, right? Kind of like a prison.
Is this that white world that's like all rainy from Kimona from Attack of the Clones, kind of?
She goes to, it looks like a civilization that once was but is no longer, and that's when these giant silver and purple things or beings take her away to Mark Zuckerberg's house, which I can only imagine is what Mark Zuckerberg's house looks like.
Oh, right, yeah.
But with more lotion.
With more lotion, for sure. And it's kind of like this prison, and it's all sorts of confusing.
Let me go!
You are not in a prison. Where do you want to be? Name yourself.
She gets space dementia. She's losing her mind. She's rambling, which is actually a pretty cool, fun scene to watch. And then she's like taking puzzle pieces and doing mathematical equations in her head that I have no idea how she's doing outside of memorization. And that's when that being comes back in. And she's like, "Yo, what do you want to do?" And that's when we start traveling throughout history, and it gets real weird.
I get the feeling she was in there for like maybe like 1,000 years, like just in this white room trying to figure out like what's going on, and we're just getting highlights of like synapses happening. She's like finally getting it. I don't know. It's almost like a purgatory she's in or something. But then we get these like 3 really distinct different parts of history set pieces. Just to list them off quickly. She's like a showgirl in Vegas.
Paris.
Like, I'm guessing maybe like the 1920s or something like that, maybe 1940s. She's a warrior in maybe in a desert arid climate. And
why is she fighting Colonel Custer?
She's in like the BC era. Like this is a long time ago. And then she's with her husband in bed for a little bit. And then she's kind of in space. And I love the space part. And I'll just say that that's my favorite. But I'm going to toss it to you guys and get a little discussion because I thought these set pieces were really cool.
I mean, I always love more Courtney B. Vance, I love me some Johnny Cochran. I thought that was like the most emotional part of it. It was like the heart of it. I mean, I love a good sword and sandal cutaway too, but don't get me wrong, but like it's them in bed together, that's what drew me into the first episode, and
the
it's what's
same
drawing me back
repetition of the scenes. Does it hit any differently though, knowing that like he cheated on her and is probably Tick's dad?
Yeah, it's a little more sour, but I mean, I feel like I don't know if I fully understand what's going on, but maybe there's hope for like second Courtney B. Vance to come back and like a parallel universe version of him, and then he can redeem himself.
That's one of my big questions is if this is the only Uncle George we get from here on out, I feel like Stevie is going to be pretty sad about it.
Yeah, I still think it was the biggest mistake this show made by killing off Uncle George by episode 2. I feel like it just lost a lot of the life that Courtney B. Vance brought to this show. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I kind of loved the warrior section we got here where it kind of goes through the 36th chamber of Shaolin type deal where she's going up against this person nonstop until she ends up becoming victorious. And I thought it was just such a cool mashup when, they're going into battle and you look over and there's a bunch of Confederates like charging her. It was just really jarring.
Yeah, I guess I described it as BC, but that's not really true, I guess.
No, Colonel Custer got his throat slit in there. So no matter what dimension he's in, he loses. But yeah, that I thought was really neat. I enjoyed that. Along with her floating into space and the vibrant colors we got from that was really neat.
Space was so good. I wasn't a big fan of the like Paris dancing one. I thought it was kind of boring. But Josh, if you love the space one, you should talk about that.
Well, I think that one plays a part because I think that, it starts off as like a real fantasy in her mind. Like, what would be cool and gaudy and fancy. And I think she kind of like matures as it goes on, and it's kind of cool to see. Even though this plays out so quick, these 4 set pieces, and I can't even like understate how much money this must have cost to put all this stuff together in production. But
well, this is really crappy of me. Like I don't remember these women's names, but the woman who she visits in Paris was a huge deal from like a women's, I guess, rights perspective. It was very interesting, like politically. And then even when she's on her way to the observatory, that woman who passes her in the motorcycle, like you guys remember that scene?
Yeah.
That's based on a real woman who was the first African-American woman to travel across the United States on a motorcycle. It's like supposed to literally be that person, which is really cool. Yeah, I know, and that's shame on me for not knowing their names, but look them up and learn about them.
That's dope. I would love to read more about her. So the last set piece that we see, we've been talking about it. She's in space and she's exploring with Uncle George. And again, I get the feeling that they probably spend like hundreds of years maybe exploring a single planet or multiple planets. But one thing that struck me, guys, is like there's so many allegories and metaphors in here. And one of them that just really caught me off guard is there's these 2 CGI aliens, or 2 or 3 of them.
The Toy Story aliens?
Yeah, they're like look Toy Story looking. They're like CGI. They're waddling up. They're really cool, but they're like accepting and super nice to these people, and that's something that like white people on their own planet would never be to them. And it just like kind of hit me like a bolt of lightning when these cute little green aliens are like giving them a present.
Do you get it? I mean, yeah, it's sweet.
Is it that obvious? I don't know. Is it supposed to be that?
I thought so. I mean, yeah. I mean, like what I was more curious about was like, where is she? Is she? Because it looks like there's like neuro pathways or whatever when she's like, or like maybe it's like wormholes. Like, you said like, we were trying to figure out spoilers. Is she God now? What's happened?
I think she's like Ozymandias from Watchmen,
Yes.
and we brought up Watchmen earlier. But Dave, you got a theory on her?
I'm fine with her being God. That seems like about right for the show. Seems like we were always headed to somebody being some kind of deity.
She's like Ozymandias. She's kind of like experienced everything, or has like found some true nirvana or something like that. But she doesn't choose to stay in limbo and live with this other race of beings.
I guess I'm going with a parallel timeline idea.
Oh yeah.
Like because Atticus comes back alone, so I feel like now maybe this is probably going to be proven wrong in mere moments of the next episode, but I don't know. It just feels like I don't know. It just feels like we're coming to some kind of merging of universes, or she's like become like the master of her timeline and now is going to return to the prime timeline or the darkest timeline or whatever it may
what
be.
was up, like the book and the comic book, like are those clues? Because it was said it was like written by Tick's niece and the book was written by his uncle. Is that a clue to the parallel universe thing? Like what's I'm so, this episode is so confusing to me. I'm sorry. I have no idea.
I don't
what's
think
happening.
so. I think that's a clue for the soon to be arriving police of who killed this cop that's on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes more sense.
And like I love this clip. Stevie, do you like this cliffhanger?
I do, because it raises a lot of questions that I hope we get answered in the next 3 episodes. I just hope it doesn't take it to one of those find out next season type deals. I hope it connects to like everything and they don't spend a summer trying to figure out what in the hell to do with this, because I mean that's kind of like a Lost type deal where it's like, hey, we're throwing this in there and like, oh, what does it mean? But you're never gonna find out. Like, I hope they actually bring things together that actually makes sense.
Mystery boxes. Isn't J.J. Abrams an executive producer?
Damon Lindelof, yeah. I mean, yeah, J.J. Abrams probably will do that.
I love it, and my personal theory is that I don't know. When Hippolyta comes back, she's going to be so good at everything that this is what I'm hoping, that this mere comic book by the side of a dead cop is going to be like really easy for her to just brush aside and move past. Because she should be a badass from here on out, as far as I'm concerned. But I think that pretty much closes us out. I would be loath not to mention the fact that, again, this song Sinnerman coming on at the end of the episode, just like every episode, hits me in just the right place every single time.
Oh, Sinnerman, where you gonna run to? Sinnerman, where you gonna run to? Sinnerman.
Pappy, I think that's episode 7. Should I pass it back to you to kind of close us out here?
Well, are we gonna do? You want to do yes or no's?
I think we should.
Yeah, I kind of want to do it episode by episode. I'll go first since I started with first host and kicked off the episode. All right, 5. Strange Case. That's the Polyjuice Potion one, and the one where we learn about Atticus's dad's sexuality. I'm gonna give that a soft yes. I think the Ruby stuff is like really strong as a concept. I wish there was more of it. Like, man, I wish we just had an hour of like that arc of like her getting the Polyjuice, like getting in there, becoming disillusioned, and then ultimately like seeking revenge on the boss. Like that could have like held up a whole 50-minute episode. But soft yes. Meet Me in Dagao. Hard yes. Best episode of the series so far. Also the most like self-contained. So I think you're probably gonna see a pattern here. 7. Soft no for I was just so confused. I don't know if I need to like watch it again. Like I watched it right before this podcast, and I just didn't give it enough time to like sink in or process. But I don't know if these 3 episodes deserve a yes altogether. And like frankly, the show is just becoming so unfocused, and it is kind of like a JJ. I'm not saying this is like a JJ Abrams fault per se, but it's like a JJ Abrams thing where it's like we have so many good questions and mysteries. Let's focus on those. Let's spend more time with Tick. Let's spend more time with Leti. Like let's spend more time with Ruby. Like we just had it, they go back to back like these weird like just off character giving them an episode thing. So soft no for that, but I'm still enjoying the show overall, I would say, but I'm more skeptical of what 8, 9, and 10 are going to bring than I've ever been to this point. So I think, Stevie, you were next host.
Can I ask you a question first, Pappy?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with a makeup call in like basketball?
This might be for history.
Is this a makeup call for Indiana Jones?
Like, of all the episodes, that's probably my. That's I knew what was happening though in History of Violence, Indiana Jones episode. At least I was like coherent with the plot. Like there were times when I just like I'm like, why are we seeing this? What's happening? Like it's cool, but we're wasting script real estate here. Time, I don't know. But Stevie, 5, 6, and 7 for you.
Oh man. After watching it again, I will give episode 5 a soft yes. I just like what they do with colors in this show. I think color red, what they do with the color red is really cool throughout the series. Episode 6, hard yes. That's my favorite episode so far. I just like how they took a story on the opposite side of the world and still somehow connected it to what we're watching. So loved that. Episode 7, it may be one of those things where it's like you change your mind after you watch episode 8 or 9 because everything makes sense now. And you're like, oh, this is so cool. But as it stands now, I think this is my first no. I'm going to give episode 7 just a no. I didn't hate it or anything. It's just, I feel like it's one of those episodes where let's throw 1,000 questions out there and see what sticks. So it'll be a no for episode 7 for me.
Interesting. Josh, I believe you were the next host.
Yeah. I totally get and respect everything you guys say, but as much hype as you guys put into episode 6 again before I watched today, I still think episode 7 was my favorite, and you guys both gave that no, which is crazy to me. But yeah, I'll give them all 3 a yes. I just love the sci-fi stuff. It keeps hitting on race in a cool, interesting, thoughtful way, even if maybe I'm slow to get it, Pappy. Sorry, but I you were like shouting get it to me.
That's like a bit I do on the pod. It's like a reoccurring. That's not
but I think like Hippolyta is like classical Greek mythology. It's a character. I don't know a ton about it, but I just think we've stopped off on a lot of these episodes to give one character the spotlight. In number 5 it was Ruby, and in number 7 it's Hippolyta, and I just love how it went so crazy and off the wall with it, even revisiting Kimona and everything. So I'm gonna give 5 decent yes, 6 a hard yes, and 7 a hard yes as well. And I'll pass it on over to Dave Mello.
I am definitely siding more with you on this. I think episode 5 is probably my least favorite of all the episodes so far. That was the closest I came to just being like, all right, I don't even know what the hell I'm even watching anymore. So that was that one. I'll do lean no if I'm gonna take a cue from the Nate Silver way of describing things. I'll say lean no. Episode 6. It has grown on me over time. At first, I was like, okay, again, not sure what's actually going on. But talking about it and thinking about it, I was like, no, that's actually good vibes. So I'm gonna give that one a lean yes. Wow. And then the most recent one is my favorite since the first one. So I'm gonna go a hard yes on episode 7, which I thought was incredible. I just loved the whole second half of it. I was like, yes, this is what I have been hoping to get from this show this whole time.
We kept saying that she was in space. I don't know if can you describe space for us? I don't know if we ever really said what it was. What is the space?
Purple? Like
dreamy? Slow motion-y?
Cool.
It's like Cosmos.
It's great.
Because that's what black people are. Myth.
That's about as good as it can get in terms of spoilers. Hedging our bets, getting yeses and nos, someone's least favorite episode, someone's favorite episode so far. Everyone's going to like this, but it doesn't get better than having a guest like Dave Wheelroot Mello on the podcast, host of the Goodbye Mellow Brick Road podcast. Dave, really quickly, do you want to describe what that podcast is all about?
We are just we just crank out top 5s, any top 5 you can think of in the world. Today we released top 5 candy bars, and that was a great one. And we got it. It's good times. Like, we keep the good times rolling.
We'd love to have you on the last episode or two here, and I think like also we're hoping Money Mike will be back as well, right?
Yeah, Dave, would you like to come back and finish us out?
It would be an honor.
That is the way to do it. You got to put him on the spot. Josh texted me. You got to put him on the spot on air, which is a good call from Josh. But to put you on the spot, make sure you look up Goodbye Mellow Brick Road, subscribe, give it a good rating on iTunes if you enjoyed this podcast tonight. Please do the same for spoilers or wherever you're listening to us. Use that app's mechanism to provide us positive feedback. That's always helpful. Look for more spooky spoilers that come out the rest of this month. I think that's it. Take us away, Spooky Spoiler Buzz.
Spoiler Man here. Our email is podcastspoilers@gmail.com. Twitter is @spoilers_pod. Our Instagram is podcast spoilers. It's lit. Now you can check us out on Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, Apple, and Google Podcasts. That was Spoilers.